The Bible says all the fountains of the deep were broken up in one day. If you read the book of Jasher, you can get it from our ministry. I cannot verify that it's legitimate, the actual book of Jasher referred to in the Bible. There is a book of Jasher referred to in the Bible. This may or may not be it, I don't know. But it's interesting reading nonetheless. In the book of Jasher it says, "And on that day the Lord caused the whole earth to shake, and the sun darkened, and the foundations of the world raged, and the whole earth was moved violently, and lightning flashed, and the thunder roared, and all the foundations of the earth were broken up." Jasher chapter 6. Interesting. I think what happened, the dump of ice on the poles caused the earth's crust to crack. Ice spread out toward the equator, buried the mammoths, made the earth wobble, and the earth was totally covered by water. The Bible says all the high hills were covered. Now there are some idiots out there teaching it was just a local flood in the days of Noah. The Bible says the high hills were covered. It's not a local flood. If the earth were reduced down to the size of this globe right here, all the oceans in the world would only fill about 1 tablespoon. If you smoothed out the earth, the oceans right now would be 12,000 feet deep. Oceans average 12,000 feet deep. But if you smoothed out the earth, they would average 8,000 feet deep everywhere. There's plenty of water on the earth to cover the planet. Technically, 1 drop of water would cover the planet if you spread it real thin. I mean, real thin. I flew back over to Pacific one time, and I came back, I said to one of the guys in my office, I said, "Man, that Pacific Ocean is huge." He said, "That's just the top of it." Wow, what a thought. That is just the top of it. There's a lot of water in these oceans out there. When the climbers got to the top Mount Everest, 1953, the year I was born, they got up here on Mount Everest. They began to find something interesting. Petrified clams on top Mount Everest. In Peru, a couple years ago, they found giant oysters up to 11 feet across, 2 miles above sea level. That's a big oyster. You should see the pearl. And these clams are interesting. I've got some on the table down here. They're petrified clams in the closed position. Now think about it for a minute. When a clam dies, it opens. The muscle inside relaxes. The ligaments on the outside pull the shell open almost instantly. When a clam dies, it opens up. How would you get bazillions of petrified clams in the closed position on top of mountains all over the world? Well, I would like to point out, Your Honor, that Mount Everest is a little ways from the beach, number 1. Number 2, clams do not climb mountains very well. And number 3, when a clam dies, it opens. The best explanation for this is they were buried alive. Sometimes huge beds of these are found. A guy in Opp, Alabama said, "Brother Hovind, you want some petrified clams for a museum?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "They're 4 feet thick in my backyard." When he rototills his garden, he brings up thousands of petrified clams, closed petrified clams. We've got a bunch in our museum down in Pensacola, Florida. Even fragile items like eggs are found fossilized. I believe the sediments would settle out of this flood. Fine sediments would preserve things in incredible detail. Here's a fossilized jellyfish. We have an arm to an octopus, fossilized octopus arm in our museum. Soft tissue simply doesn't fossilize. Under very special conditions are required. The Bible says the fountains of the deep broke open. So I think the earth got struck by a meteor. The water underneath went shooting to the surface, and the earth was covered with water. See, the earth's crust is kind of interesting. It's pretty thin, actually, in some spots. 3 to 5 miles thick under the crust, under the oceans, and 30 miles thick under the continents. The hot water from inside the earth would come shooting out, and it would kill animals that live within a certain radius of the crack as the hot water escaped. As the basalt bulged up in the middle, the plates are going to slide down, explaining, as I said earlier, about the wrinkled mountains. Take a look at these mountains in British Columbia. They've been pressed from the end, wrinkled up. What happened? As the water came shooting out, the hot water would kill all sorts of things within a certain radius. If you poured a gallon of boiling water into your aquarium, it would kill all the fishies within a certain distance, okay, till the temperature was dissipated. All over the world, little tiny creatures called diatoms are found dead in great big thick beds called diatomaceous earth. These diatoms are super tiny. It takes about 1,000 years to get an inch of dead diatoms at the bottom of the ocean. They very slowly accumulate. When it dries out, they pack it into a special powder called diatomaceous earth. It is used for all sorts of things. It's used as kitty litter. It's used as oil dye. Diatomaceous earth is used as swimming pool filters, used in bricks, used in aspirin. It's used in medicines. It's used in all sorts of strange things you would never think of. It's diatomaceous earth because it is so absorbent. I was in Lompoc, California preaching, and I went to visit the world's largest diatomaceous earth quarry. I believe it's the world's largest. They're in Lompoc, California, which is right smack on top of the San Andreas Fault. There in Lompoc, California, back in 1976, they found the fossil skeleton of a whale standing on end, 80 feet long, running through diatomaceous earth. Now, I know the whale is parallel with the layers. That's okay, because the layers have tilted up also. So the thickness of the whale becomes the problem, not the length. But still, if this stuff accumulates an inch every 1,000 years, how long is a dead whale going to lay there waiting for this stuff to gather around him? Dead whales are dissolved at the bottom of the ocean in a few weeks or months. Even the bones eventually disappear. They gave me a chunk of their diatomaceous earth out there. In that one little square foot, there are dozens, maybe even up to 60 fish skeletons. You know, fish skeletons are found in diatomaceous earth, and they're found with their gills extended, their fins extended. They died terrified. Whatever was happening to them was terrifying these creatures. Fossil fish are found by the trillions. The chalk cliffs of England and Dover, England are found this way. Chalk, from the Latin word crescia, which means chalk. Chalk 300 feet thick. There was a catastrophe that formed all this. The Bible says the waters prevailed upon the earth. I think what happened during the first part of the flood, dead things settled out. And that flood represents God's judgment on this planet. Point number 5 of the Hovind Theory is during the first few months of the flood, the dead animals would settle out. People ask, why aren't more human fossils found? Well, humans are smarter than animals. Some humans are, and some animals. And they would tend to avoid drowning till the last possible minute. Animals that are buried on top or very, very shallow soil are not going to fossilize. Think of all the millions of buffalo that were killed out west in the last few hundred years. None of them fossilized because they weren't buried. So fossils only form if an animal is buried pretty deeply and pretty quickly before it has time to decay. Marvin Lubenow says about 4,000 sets of human remains have been found. I think there are fewer humans than animals found fossilized because they were smarter and would avoid drowning till later in the flood, and therefore they're not going to be fossilized. We cover more on that in video 7. The trees that are uprooted would float around in big log mats the size of Texas. They're going to be buried and become the coal seams that we see today. Moving water does some very interesting phenomena. As water is moving, it automatically sorts things. It can form 5 or 6 layers simultaneously. There's a good videotape called Experiments in Stratification that shows the top strata can actually be older than the bottom strata. If the water's moving, it forms multiple layers simultaneously. Moving water does some strange things. How many of you have ever seen those things you buy at the store with 2 pieces of glass and different colored sand in between? And when you flip it over, it forms all these layers real quickly, okay? It doesn't take a long time. Stratification can happen very quickly. Underwater landslides, like the one we saw in Indonesia in 2004, can cause, it's called a turbidity current. They can do enormous damage underwater, causing tsunamis on the surface, which kill 250,000 people. In 1929, there was an underwater landslide that traveled 70 miles an hour, cut 2 transatlantic cables. That one landslide covered 40,000 square miles. That's about the size of Ohio. One landslide underwater.